When the arrogant college senior cornered the nervous freshman in the campus parking lot, he had no idea whose son he was humiliating. What happened next would shake the entire university to its core, and by the end of this story, you'll understand why respect should never be conditional on who someone's parents are. Comment where you're watching from today, because this story is about to take you on an emotional journey that will change how you think about judgment, family bonds, and the power of standing up for what's right. The morning sun cast long shadows across Westfield University's pristine campus as students hurried between ivy-covered buildings, their backpacks heavy with textbooks and dreams. The air was crisp with the promise of autumn, and the sound of footsteps on cobblestone paths created a symphony of academic ambition. Among the bustling crowds, 18-year-old Rumour Willis, though he went by his middle name, Scout, stood, frozen, beside his father's modest sedan, clutching a worn duffel bag that contained everything he owned. Scout had specifically asked his famous father to drop him off in the least conspicuous vehicle possible. No limousines, no entourage, no fanfare. He wanted to blend in, to be just another freshman finding his way in the world. His father, the legendary action star Bruce Willis, had respected his son's wishes completely. He understood the weight that came with carrying a famous name, and he wanted Scout to have the chance to discover who he was beyond the shadow of Hollywood stardom. The campus was a maze of Gothic architecture and modern facilities where students from every walk of life converged to pursue their education. Scout's eyes darted nervously across the scene, taking in groups of confident upperclassmen who seemed to navigate the terrain with practiced ease. Their laughter echoed off the stone walls, and their casual conversations about professors and parties made Scout feel like an outsider looking in through glass. As Bruce prepared to leave, he placed a gentle hand on his son's shoulder. The gesture was subtle, but filled with years of love, protection, and understanding. Scout had always been the quieter one among his siblings, more introspective and sensitive to the world around him. Unlike his famous father, who commanded attention, in every room he entered, Scout preferred the shadows, finding comfort in observation rather than performance. Just as Bruce was about to drive away, a group of upperclassmen emerged from the nearby dormitory building. Leading them was Cole Harris, a senior whose family's wealth had bought him everything except humility. Cole had been the undisputed king of his social circle for 3 years running, using his influence and connections to maintain his position at the top of the campus hierarchy. His expensive clothes, perfectly styled hair, and air of superiority made him instantly recognizable to anyone who spent time at Westfield. Cole's eyes immediately locked onto Scout's nervous figure and the modest car his father was driving. A smirk spread across his face as he recognized an opportunity to assert his dominance in front of his followers. Greg Daniels and Christopher Fletcher, his loyal companions, flanked him on either side, ready to laugh on cue at whatever cruel observation their leader was about to make. The confrontation began innocently enough, with Cole approaching Scout under the pretense of being helpful. His voice carried the false warmth that bullies often use to mask their true intentions, creating an illusion of friendliness while setting up their victim for humiliation. "Hey there, freshman," Cole called out, his tone dripping with condescension. "You look a little lost. First day jitters getting to you?" His friends snickered behind him, already sensing where this interaction was heading. Scout's grip tightened on his duffel bag, his instincts telling him that this encounter would not end well. Scout nodded politely, hoping to keep the interaction brief and escape to the safety of his dormitory. "Yeah, just trying to find my way." "Around," he replied quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. The humility in his response only seemed to embolden Cole further, who interpreted Scout's soft-spoken nature as weakness rather than the quiet strength it actually represented. Well, let me give you some advice, Cole continued, stepping closer and speaking loud enough for other passing students to hear. Westfield has a certain standard. We're not just any state school where anyone can fit in. This place is about excellence, connections, and knowing your place in the social order. His words were carefully chosen to cut deep, designed to make Scout feel small and unwelcome in his new environment. The gathering crowd of students began to slow their pace, sensing drama unfolding in the parking lot. Some pulled out their phones, ready to capture whatever was about to happen for social media consumption. The attention only fueled Cole's performance, making him more aggressive in his approach. "That car your dad's driving," Cole gestured dismissively toward Bruce's sedan, "tells me everything I need to know about where you come from. Nothing wrong with being working class, kid, but you might want to consider a community college instead. Save yourself the embarrassment of trying to keep up with people who actually belong here." Scout's face reddened with a mixture of anger and humiliation, but he remained silent. Years of being Bruce Willis's son had taught him that responding to bullies with aggression often made situations worse. He had learned to weather storms of judgment and assumption, understanding that people's perceptions were often more about them than about him. Bruce, who had been slowly pulling away, noticed the commotion in his rearview mirror. His paternal instincts kicked in immediately as he saw his son surrounded by older students who clearly meant him harm. Every fiber of his being wanted to intervene, to use his presence and reputation to shut down the confrontation immediately. But he also knew that Scout needed to learn to navigate these situations on his own, that rushing to his rescue would only confirm the bully's assumptions about weakness. Cole continued his verbal assault, emboldened by Scout's silence. "Look at those clothes," he laughed, pointing at Scout's simple jeans and plain t-shirt. "Thrift store chic? That might work at your old high school, but here at Westfield, presentation matters. People notice when you don't measure up to the standard." Christopher Fletcher joined in, his voice carrying the cruel edge of someone desperate to maintain his position in the social hierarchy. "Maybe he's here on some kind of charity scholarship. You know how schools like to bring in a few token poor kids to make themselves feel better about their exclusivity." The laughter from Cole's group grew louder and more pointed, drawing even more attention from passing students. Some watched with uncomfortable expressions, clearly disapproving of the bullying, but too intimidated by Cole's reputation to intervene. Others seemed entertained by the spectacle, their phones capturing every moment of Scout's humiliation. Scout's hands began to tremble slightly, not from fear, but from the tremendous effort it took to restrain himself. His father had taught him that true strength came from knowing when not to fight, but every instinct screamed at him to defend himself and his family's honor. The weight of expectations, both his own and those he imagined others had for him, as Bruce Willis's son, pressed down on his shoulders like a physical burden. "You know what I think?" Cole said, stepping even closer to Scout, his voice dropping to a mock whisper that somehow seemed more threatening than his earlier volume. "I think you're going to spend the next 4 years being reminded every single day that you don't belong here. Every party you won't be invited to, every girl who won't give you a second look, every professor who expects excellence you can't deliver, it's all going to reinforce the same message. You're not Westfield material." The cruelty in Cole's words was calculated and precise, designed to wound on multiple levels. He was attacking not just Scout's appearance or economic status, but his fundamental sense of belonging and self-worth. It was the kind of psychological warfare that could destroy a young person's confidence before their college experience had even truly begun. Greg Daniels, sensing an opportunity to impress his leader, added his own contribution to the attack. "Maybe you should call Daddy to come pick you up. Save yourself the embarrassment of failing out freshman year when you realize you can't compete with real students." At the mention of his father, Scout's composure finally began to crack. His jaw tightened, and his eyes flashed with an anger that had been building throughout the encounter. The protective instinct he felt toward his family was stronger than his desire to avoid confrontation, and Cole had finally crossed a line that couldn't be ignored. But just as Scout was about to respond, something unexpected happened. A small group of students who had been watching from a distance began to move closer, their expressions showing disapproval of what they were witnessing. Among them was Abigail DeLeon, a sophomore who had experienced her own share of bullying and recognized the signs of someone being targeted unfairly. "That's enough, Cole," Abigail said firmly, her voice cutting through the laughter and cruel comments. "Leave him alone. He hasn't done anything to you." Her intervention surprised everyone, including Scout, who had begun to feel completely isolated. In the face of the group's attack, Cole turned his attention to Abigail, his expression darkening with annoyance at being challenged. "This doesn't concern you, Abigail. Mind your own business and let the grown-ups handle freshman orientation." His dismissive tone revealed his belief that his authority extended beyond just intimidating freshmen to controlling anyone who dared question his behavior. But Abigail stood her ground, joined by Justin Murphy and Kristen Dudley, two other students, who had grown tired of Cole's reign of terror on campus. Their presence shifted the dynamic of the confrontation, transforming it from a one-sided attack into something more complex and uncertain. "Actually, it does concern me," Abigail replied, steadily. "It concerns anyone who has to watch you treat people like garbage just because you think your family's money makes you better than everyone else. Newsflash, Cole, it doesn't." The crowd around them had grown larger, and the energy was beginning to shift. Some students were nodding in agreement with Abigail's words, while others looked nervously between the two sides, unsure of how the confrontation would resolve. Cell phone cameras continued to roll, capturing every moment of what was quickly becoming a defining incident in Westfield University's social landscape. Scout watched in amazement as these strangers stepped forward to defend him, risking their own social standing to challenge someone with significant power on campus. Their courage gave him strength, reminding him that he wasn't alone in this new environment and that there were people who valued fairness over hierarchy. Cole's face reddened with anger at being publicly challenged, especially by students he considered beneath his notice. His carefully constructed image of untouchable authority was being undermined in front of a growing audience, and he could feel his control of the situation slipping away. "You have no idea who you're messing with," Cole snarled, his mask of civility finally dropping completely. "My family has connections at this school that go back generations. I can make life very difficult for people who don't know their place." The threat was clear and unmistakable, revealing the true source of Cole's power on campus. It wasn't his personality, intelligence, or leadership skills that made him influential. It was the fear of retribution that kept other students in line. His family's donations and connections created a web of protection that had allowed him to operate without consequences for years. But as Cole made his threat, something unexpected happened. Bruce Willis, who had been watching the entire confrontation from his car, finally reached his limit. The sight of his son being bullied and threatened was more than his protective instincts could bear, and he made a decision that would change everything about this encounter. The car door opened with a quiet click, and Bruce stepped out with the measured movements of someone who had faced down much more dangerous adversaries than college bullies. His presence was immediate and commanding, causing conversations to stop and heads to turn throughout the parking lot. Even those who didn't immediately recognize him could sense that the dynamic of the situation had just shifted dramatically. As Bruce walked toward the group, his footsteps echoing off the pavement, the truth about Scout's identity was about to be revealed in the most dramatic way possible. The humble freshman that Cole had been tormenting was about to be revealed as the son of one of Hollywood's most beloved action stars, And the consequences of that revelation would ripple through Westfield University in ways that no one could have predicted. The stage was set for a confrontation that would become legendary on campus, not just for its dramatic revelation, but for the lessons about respect, humility, and the dangers of judging people based on appearances. Cole Harris was about to learn that true power doesn't announce itself with expensive clothes and family connections. It reveals itself through character, integrity, and the willingness to stand up for what's right. The parking lot fell into an eerie silence as Bruce Willis approached the group, his presence transforming the entire atmosphere from one of teenage bullying to something far more serious and consequential. Students who had been chattering and laughing moments before now stood frozen, their phones still recording but their expressions shifting from entertainment to awe and disbelief. The morning sun seemed to spotlight Bruce as he moved with the confident stride of someone who had spent decades commanding attention on movie sets and red carpets around the world. Cole Harris, who had been reveling in his power just seconds earlier, felt his confidence begin to crumble as he tried to process what he was seeing. The man approaching them wasn't just any concerned parent, he was Bruce Willis, the legendary action star whose face had graced movie posters in Cole's childhood bedroom. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming as Cole's mind struggled to reconcile the humble car and modest appearance with the reality of who Scout's father actually was. Scout watched his father approach with a mixture of relief and apprehension. He had specifically requested anonymity for this very reason. He didn't want his college experience to be defined by his father's fame. But as he saw the cruel smirk fade from Cole's face and noticed the growing crowd of students recognizing Bruce, Scout realized that his secret was about to be exposed in the most public way possible. Bruce's expression was calm but unmistakably protective as he reached the group. His years of playing heroes on screen had taught him how to project authority without aggression, and he used every bit of that skill now. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet intensity that had made him famous in films like Die Hard and Pulp Fiction, but there was also the unmistakable warmth of a father defending his child. "Is there a problem here?" Bruce asked, his eyes moving deliberately from Cole to each of his companions before settling on Scout. The question was simple, but the weight behind it was enormous. Everyone present understood that they were witnessing something that would become campus legend, a moment that would be talked about for years to come. Cole's mouth opened and closed several times as he tried to find words, his earlier bravado completely evaporating in the face of Bruce's presence. The same voice that had been so confident in tearing down Scout now struggled to form coherent sentences. "Mr. Willis, we were just welcome committee, sort of," he stammered, his face cycling through various shades of red as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. Christopher Fletcher and Greg Daniels, who had been so eager to join in the bullying moments before, now looked like they wanted to disappear entirely. Their earlier laughter had been replaced by the kind of panic that comes from realizing you've made a catastrophic error in judgment. The power dynamic that had seemed so clear just minutes ago had been completely reversed, and they found themselves on the wrong side of a situation that was spiraling beyond their control. Bruce's gaze settled on Cole with the kind of intensity that had made villains cower in countless movies. But this wasn't a scripted scene. This was a real father protecting his real son, and the stakes were far more personal than any Hollywood production. "A welcome committee," Bruce repeated slowly, his tone suggesting he didn't believe a word of what Cole had said. "That's interesting, because from where I was sitting, it looked like you were giving my son a very different kind of welcome." The crowd around them had grown even larger, with students abandoning their morning routines to witness this unprecedented confrontation. Some were frantically texting friends to come see what was happening, while others were already posting videos to social media with captions like "Bruce Willis at Westfield" and "Die Hard, Dad Defends Son." The incident was going viral in real time, and everyone present knew they were part of something extraordinary. Abigail Delian, who had been the first to defend Scout, found herself in the surreal position of standing next to one of Hollywood's biggest stars. But rather than being starstruck, she felt vindicated in her decision to speak up. Her instincts about Scout being a good person deserving of respect had been proven correct in the most dramatic way possible. "Mr. Willis," Abigail said respectfully, "your son wasn't doing anything wrong. He was just trying to find his dorm when these guys started harassing him about his clothes and his car and basically telling him he didn't belong here." Her words were clear and factual, providing Bruce with the context he needed to understand exactly what had transpired. Bruce nodded appreciatively at Abigail, recognizing her courage in speaking up for his son. "Thank you for standing up for Scout," he said warmly. "It takes real character to defend someone when you could just as easily walk away." His acknowledgement of her actions sent a clear message to everyone watching about the kind of behavior he valued and respected. Cole, meanwhile, was desperately trying to salvage the situation, his mind racing for any way to undo the damage he had caused. "Mr. Willis, sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding," he began, his voice taking on a pleading quality that was completely different from his earlier arrogance. "We were just trying to help your son get oriented to campus life. You know how it is with freshmen. They need guidance from upperclassmen who know the ropes." The lies came easily to Cole, but they fell flat in the face of multiple witnesses who had seen and heard everything. Bruce's expression didn't change, but his silence spoke volumes about how little credibility he gave to Cole's version of events. The truth was written all over the faces of the other students present, and no amount of smooth talking could change what had actually happened. Justin Murphy, emboldened by Bruce's presence and Abigail's example, stepped forward to add his own testimony. "That's not true," he said firmly. "I heard the whole thing. You were telling Scout he didn't belong here, making fun of his clothes, and threatening to make his life difficult if he didn't know his place." His words cut through Cole's attempts at deception like a knife through butter. The weight of multiple witnesses confirming the truth created an atmosphere of accountability that Cole had never experienced before. Throughout his time at Westfield, his family's influence had protected him from consequences, allowing him to behave badly without ever facing real repercussions. But standing before Bruce Willis with a crowd of students documenting his every word, Cole realized that his usual escape routes were blocked. Bruce turned his attention back to his son, his expression softening with paternal concern. "Scout, are you okay?" he asked gently. The use of his son's preferred name in front of everyone was a subtle but powerful gesture of respect and support. It showed that Bruce understood his son's desire for independence while making it clear that he would always be there when needed. Scout nodded, though the emotional toll of the morning was clearly visible on his face. "I'm fine, Dad. I wanted to handle it myself," he said quietly. His words revealed the internal struggle he was facing, grateful for his father's intervention, but disappointed that his attempt at independence had been derailed so quickly. "And no, you did," Bruce replied with understanding. "And you were handling it perfectly. You kept your composure, you didn't sink to their level, and you let your character speak for itself. That takes real strength." His words were both proud and instructional, acknowledging Scout's maturity while reinforcing the values that had guided their family. The crowd was hanging on every word of this father-son exchange, witnessing an intimate moment of family dynamics playing out against the backdrop of a very public confrontation. Many students found themselves thinking about their own relationships with their parents and the different kinds of pressure that came with family expectations. Cole, sensing that the situation was completely beyond his control, made one last desperate attempt to minimize the damage. "Mr. Willis, I want to apologize if my words came across wrong," he said, his voice now completely devoid of its earlier confidence. "I have tremendous respect for you and your work, and I would never intentionally disrespect your family." The apology was hollow and self-serving, focused more on Cole's fear of consequences than any genuine remorse for his actions. Bruce saw right through it, his years of reading scripts and working with actors giving him keen insight into the difference between authentic emotion and calculated performance. "Here's what I think happened," Bruce said, his voice taking on the authoritative tone that had made him famous in courtroom dramas and action films. "I think you saw a quiet kid with modest clothes and an older car, and you decided he was an easy target. I think you used your position as an upperclassman to try to humiliate him in front of your friends and anyone else who would watch. And I think you got so caught up in showing off your power that you forgot the most basic rule of human decency: treat others the way you want to be treated." Each word hit Cole like a physical blow, stripping away his defenses and exposing the ugly truth of his behavior. The crowd around them was completely silent, understanding that they were witnessing more than just a celebrity scolding a bully. They were seeing a masterclass in accountability and moral clarity. "What I don't understand," Bruce continued, "is why someone with all the advantages you clearly have would choose to use them to tear down someone who's done nothing wrong. What does that say about your character? What does that say about the kind of person you've chosen to become?" The questions weren't rhetorical. They demanded real self-reflection from Cole and everyone else listening. Bruce wasn't just defending his son. He was challenging an entire system of behavior that allowed bullying to flourish in academic environments. Gregory Wiggins, a junior who had been watching from the edge of the crowd, found himself deeply affected by Bruce's words. He had witnessed Cole's bullying behavior many times over the years, but had never found the courage to speak up. Now, seeing the consequences of that silence playing out in real time, he felt compelled to add his voice to those supporting Scout. "Mr. Willis is right," Gregory said, his voice carrying across the parking lot. "Cole does this to a lot of students, especially freshmen who don't have connections or money. He uses his family's influence to intimidate people, and most of us just look the other way because we're afraid of becoming targets ourselves." This revelation sent shockwaves through the crowd as many students began to realize that they were witnessing not just an isolated incident, but the exposure of a pattern of abusive behavior that had gone unchecked for too long. The power of Bruce's presence had created a moment of truth where people felt safe to speak up about things they had previously kept silent. Kristen Dudley, inspired by Gregory's honesty, stepped forward with her own testimony. "He's done it to me too," she said, her voice shaking slightly with emotion. "Last semester he cornered me at a party and told everyone I was only there because I was someone's charity case. I was so humiliated that I almost transferred schools." The accumulation of testimonies created an undeniable picture of Cole's character and behavior patterns. What had started as a confrontation about one specific incident was evolving into a broader reckoning with campus culture and the abuse of social power. Bruce listened to each testimony with the focused attention he brought to studying scripts, understanding that these students were trusting him with their experiences and deserved to be heard. When the last person finished speaking, he turned back to Cole with an expression that was somehow both compassionate and unwavering. "You have a choice to make right now," Bruce told Cole, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had faced countless challenges and emerged stronger. You can continue down this path, using your privileges to hurt people who can't fight back, and eventually you'll find yourself alone and empty, wondering why nobody respects you. Or you can take this moment as an opportunity to become someone better, someone who uses their advantages to lift others up instead of tearing them down. The challenge was clear and direct, offering Cole a path toward redemption while making it equally clear that the choice was his to make. Bruce wasn't threatening consequences or demanding apologies. He was appealing to whatever decency remained in Cole's character and challenging him to find it. The silence that followed was profound and transformative, as everyone present contemplated the choice that Bruce had laid out not just for Cole, but for all of them. In that moment, the parking lot of Westfield University had become a classroom where one of Hollywood's most respected figures was teaching lessons about character, integrity, and the responsibility that comes with privilege. Scout watched his father with a mixture of pride and amazement, seeing beyond the movie star persona to the man who had raised him with these exact values. The humiliation he had felt earlier was now replaced by a deep appreciation for the way his father had handled the situation, not with violence or threats, but with moral clarity and the kind of strength that comes from knowing who you are and what you stand for. The crowd began to shift and murmur as people processed what they had witnessed, many of them pulling out their phones to share their experiences with friends and family. The incident was already becoming part of Westfield University folklore, but more importantly, it was sparking conversations about bullying, privilege, and the kind of community they wanted to create on their campus. The weight of Bruce's challenge hung in the air like morning mist, and for several long moments, Cole Harris stood frozen in the center of what had become an impromptu arena of accountability. His face cycled through emotions, shame, anger, confusion, and something that might have been the first stirring of genuine self-reflection he had experienced in years. The crowd around him waited in collective silence, understanding that they were witnessing a pivotal moment not just for Cole, but for the entire social fabric of their university. Finally, Cole's shoulders sagged, as if an invisible weight had been placed upon them. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, stripped of all the bravado and arrogance that had defined his earlier performance. I don't know why I did that," he admitted, his eyes fixed on the pavement rather than meeting Bruce's steady gaze. "I guess I thought it made me look important, putting someone else down to make myself feel bigger." The admission sent ripples through the crowd, as many students had never heard Cole acknowledge wrongdoing, let alone vulnerability. His carefully constructed image of untouchable superiority was crumbling in real time, revealing the insecurity and emptiness that had driven his need to dominate others. It was a moment of raw honesty that changed how everyone present would view both Cole and themselves. Bruce nodded slowly, recognizing the difficulty of what Cole had just done. "That takes courage," he said simply. "Admitting when we're wrong is one of the hardest things any of us can do, especially in front of other people, but it's also the first step toward becoming someone better." The grace with which Bruce responded to Cole's admission demonstrated the kind of leadership that had made him beloved both on and off screen. Rather than using Cole's vulnerability as an opportunity for further humiliation, he chose to acknowledge the young man's honesty while keeping the door open for genuine growth and change. Scout watched this exchange with fascination, seeing his father's wisdom and compassion on full display. This was the man who had raised him to value character over status, kindness over power, and authenticity over image. The lessons that had seemed abstract during childhood dinner conversations were now playing out in vivid detail before his eyes. Abigail DeLeon found herself deeply moved by the transformation she was witnessing. As someone who had experienced her own share of bullying and social exclusion, She understood both the pain of being targeted and the courage required to admit wrongdoing. Cole's admission didn't erase the hurt he had caused, but it opened the possibility for healing and genuine change. "Cole," Abigail said softly, stepping forward with an expression that balanced firmness with compassion. "What you did to Scout today, and what you've done to other students, it really hurt people. But if you're serious about changing, maybe this could be the start of something different, not just for you, but for all of us." Her words carried the weight of someone who had chosen forgiveness over revenge, growth over grudges. The crowd murmured its approval, sensing that they were witnessing something rare and precious, a moment where conflict was being transformed into opportunity for genuine human connection and community healing. Dennis Porter, a sophomore who had been one of Cole's previous targets, stepped forward from the edge of the crowd. His hands were shaking slightly, but his voice was steady as he addressed the group. "Last year, Cole humiliated me in front of the entire dining hall because I couldn't afford to eat at the fancy restaurants off campus. I've been carrying that shame ever since, afraid to speak up in classes, afraid to join clubs, afraid that everyone saw me the way he made me feel that day." The pain in Dennis's voice was palpable, and many students in the crowd found themselves fighting back tears as they realized the lasting impact of casual cruelty. What had seemed like harmless teasing to some was revealed as deeply damaging behavior that had shaped a young person's entire college experience. Bruce listened to Dennis with the same focused attention he had given to all the other testimonies, understanding that healing required not just acknowledgement of wrongdoing, but validation of the pain that had been caused. "Dennis," he said gently, "I'm sorry that happened to you, and I want you to know that how someone treats you says everything about them and nothing about you. You belong here just as much as anyone else." The simple validation from someone of Bruce's stature seemed to lift a weight from Dennis's shoulders. Other students began to nod in agreement, creating a circle of support that had been absent during his original humiliation. The power of community. Acknowledgement was transforming the parking lot into a space of healing rather than harm. Cole, hearing Dennis's testimony, looked up for the first time since his admission. His eyes were red-rimmed with unshed tears as he faced the young man whose confidence he had shattered. "Dennis, I remember that day. I thought I was being funny, but I never thought about how it would affect you. I'm so sorry. I was wrong, and I've been wrong about a lot of things." The apology was halting and imperfect, but it carried the ring of genuine remorse. Dennis stood quietly for a moment, processing the words he had never expected to hear. When he finally spoke, his voice was stronger than it had been in months. "Thank you for saying that," Dennis replied. "It doesn't undo what happened, but it helps to know that you understand how much it hurt." His response demonstrated a maturity that impressed everyone present, showing that healing could begin even in the midst of accountability. Bruce watched this exchange with the satisfaction of someone who had helped facilitate something meaningful. His intervention had not just stopped a single incident of bullying, it had created space for broader healing and the possibility of systemic change within the campus community. As more students began to share their own experiences and observations, a picture emerged of a campus culture that had allowed cruelty to flourish in the shadows, while maintaining a facade of academic excellence and social harmony. The incident with Scout had pulled back the curtain on patterns of behavior that many had witnessed, but few had felt empowered to challenge. Elizabeth Thompson, a senior who served on the student council, stepped forward with a sense of institutional responsibility weighing on her shoulders. "This conversation needs to continue beyond today," she said firmly. "We need to create systems and support structures that prevent this kind of thing from happening in the first place, not just respond after someone gets hurt." Her words sparked immediate discussion among the students about concrete steps they could take to improve campus culture. Ideas began flowing freely: peer mentorship programs for freshmen, anonymous reporting systems for harassment, regular community discussions about respect and inclusion. The energy that had begun with conflict was now channeling itself toward positive action. Bruce smiled as he watched the students take ownership of their community and their responsibility to each other. This was what real leadership looked like. Not the top-down authority that came from wealth or fame, but the grassroots commitment to creating positive change that emerged from shared values and collective action. Scout, who had been largely silent during the broader discussions, finally found his voice. "I just want to say something," he began, his words carrying across the parking lot with growing confidence. "When I asked my dad to drop me off in a regular car, when I didn't want anyone to know who he was, it wasn't because I was ashamed of him. It was because I wanted to be judged for who I am, not who my father is." The honesty in Scout's words resonated deeply with students who had struggled with their own identities and the weight of family expectations. Many had come to college, hoping to reinvent themselves, to step out of shadows cast by parents, siblings, or hometown reputations. His desire for authentic connection struck a universal chord. "But what I learned today," Scout continued, "is that character reveals itself regardless of circumstances. Cole showed his character when he thought I was powerless, and all of you showed yours when you stood up for what was right, even when it was difficult. That's what really matters, not where we come from or what our parents do, but how we choose to treat each other." The wisdom in Scout's words impressed everyone present, including his father. Bruce felt a surge of pride watching his son transform a moment of personal humiliation into an opportunity for broader teaching and healing. The values they had discussed in private were now being shared publicly, multiplying their impact exponentially. Cole, who had been listening intently to every word, looked up at Scout with an expression of genuine remorse. "Scout, I owe you more than just an apology. I owe you a commitment to be different, not just because of who your father is, but because of who you are, and because everyone deserves better than what I gave you today." The promise carried weight because it was made publicly, in front of dozens of witnesses who would hold Cole accountable for following through on his words. It was no longer just a private resolution, but a community commitment that would be remembered and referenced in future interactions. As the immediate intensity of the confrontation began to settle, Bruce recognized that his presence was no longer needed for the healing process to continue. The students had taken ownership of their community and their responsibility to each other, which was exactly what needed to happen for lasting change to occur. "Scout," Bruce said gently, "I think you're in good hands here. These people," he gestured to Abigail, Justin, Dennis, Elizabeth, and the many other students who had spoken up. "They're the kind of friends and classmates who will help you become the person you're meant to be. And you'll do the same for them." The acknowledgement from Bruce carried special weight because it came from someone whose judgment had been proven reliable through decades of success and public scrutiny. His endorsement of the student's character meant something significant in a world where celebrity opinions often carried disproportionate influence. As Bruce prepared to leave, students began to approach him with a mixture of respect and genuine gratitude. They weren't starstruck by his fame, but appreciative of his wisdom and the way he had handled a difficult situation. Many thanked him not just for defending his son, but for creating space for broader healing and growth. Amy Bartlett, a freshman who had been too intimidated to speak earlier, finally found her courage. "Mr. Willis, thank you for showing us what real strength looks like. It's not about power or intimidation. It's about standing up for what's right and helping people become better versions of themselves." Her words captured what many others were, a feeling, and Bruce nodded with appreciation for her insight. That's exactly right, Amy. Real strength is about lifting others up, not tearing them down. And from what I've seen here today, this campus has a lot of strong people who are going to make great things happen. The sun had climbed higher in the sky during the extended confrontation, and the normal rhythms of campus life were beginning to reassert themselves. But everyone present understood that something fundamental had shifted. The incident would be remembered not just as a celebrity sighting, but as a moment when their community chose to confront its problems and commit to being better. As Bruce walked back toward his car, Scout fell into step beside him. The earlier tension between them about independence and protection had been resolved through their shared experience. Scout had proven he could handle difficult situations with grace and wisdom, while Bruce had demonstrated that parental support didn't have to undermine personal growth. "Dad," Scout said quietly as they reached the car, "thank you for knowing when to step in and when to step back, and thank you for raising me to believe that how we treat people matters more than anything else." Bruce smiled and placed a hand on his son's shoulder, the same gesture he had made earlier, but now carrying the weight of everything they had experienced together. "That's all I ever wanted you to understand, Scout. Everything else, the fame, the money, the recognition, it's all temporary. But the kind of person you choose to be, that lasts forever." The father-son moment was observed by the lingering crowd with the respect it deserved. Many students found themselves thinking about their own family relationships and the values that had shaped their own character development. The parking lot had become an unexpected classroom, where lessons about integrity, forgiveness, and community responsibility had been taught and learned. 3 months had passed since that transformative morning in the Westfield University parking lot, and the ripple effects of that single confrontation had spread throughout the campus like concentric circles in a pond. What had begun as a moment of cruel bullying had evolved into a movement of positive change that touched every corner of university life. The incident had become more than just campus legend. It had become a catalyst for the kind of institutional transformation that educators and administrators had been trying to achieve for years. Scout Willis had settled into college life with a confidence and sense of belonging that seemed impossible during those first terrifying moments of his freshman year. The anonymity he had craved was now balanced with meaningful connections built on genuine friendship rather than celebrity fascination. His dorm room had become a gathering place for students who valued authentic conversation over superficial social climbing, creating the kind of community he had hoped to find when he first arrived at Westfield. The transformation in Cole Harris had been perhaps the most remarkable of all. The arrogant senior who had once terrorized freshmen and wielded his family's influence like a weapon had become one of the most active advocates for campus inclusion and respect. His journey from bully to ally hadn't been easy or immediate. It had required consistent effort, uncomfortable self-reflection, and the patient support of people he had previously targeted. Cole's first step had been reaching out individually to every student he could remember hurting, offering genuine apologies and asking what he could do to make amends. Some, like Dennis Porter, had been willing to engage in dialogue and eventual forgiveness. Others had chosen to maintain their distance, and Cole had learned to respect those boundaries while continuing his own growth process. The peer mentorship program that Elizabeth Thompson had proposed in the aftermath of the incident had become one of the most successful initiatives in Westfield's history. Upperclassmen were now paired with incoming freshmen, not based on social status or family connections, but on shared interests and complementary strengths. Cole had volunteered to be part of the program, and his mentee, a shy engineering student named Alex Beasley, had initially been terrified to be paired with someone of Cole's reputation. But week after week, Cole had shown up with patience, encouragement, and genuine interest in Alex's success. He had helped with study techniques, introduced him to supportive faculty members, and most importantly, created a safe space where Alex could ask questions and express concerns without fear of judgment. The relationship had transformed both young men, giving Cole a sense of purpose beyond his own advancement and giving Alex the confidence to thrive in his academic pursuits. The anonymous reporting system that had been implemented allowed students to share concerns about harassment, discrimination, or bullying without fear of retaliation. But more importantly, it had fostered a culture of accountability where problematic behavior was addressed quickly and constructively rather than being allowed to fester in silence. Abigail DeLeon had emerged as a natural leader in these campus-wide changes, her courage in defending Scout having revealed a talent for bringing people together across social and economic divides. She had been elected to the Student Council and was working closely with university administration to ensure that the reforms initiated by student voices were given institutional support and longevity. The monthly community discussions about respect and inclusion had become some of the most well-attended events on campus, drawing students, faculty, and even community members who wanted to understand how Westfield had achieved such a dramatic cultural shift. These sessions weren't just talking circles. They were problem-solving workshops where real issues were addressed with concrete solutions. Justin Murphy and Kristen Dudley had collaborated on a documentary project about the incident and its aftermath, interviewing dozens of students about their experiences with bullying, privilege, and community responsibility. Their film had been selected for several student film festivals and was being used by other universities as a tool for discussing campus culture and social justice. But perhaps the most significant change was the one that couldn't be measured. In programs or policies, the shift in daily interactions between students that reflected a deeper understanding of human dignity and mutual respect. Hallway conversations were more inclusive, study groups were more diverse, and social events were more welcoming to students from all backgrounds. Bruce Willis had returned to campus twice since that initial confrontation, not as a celebrity making appearances, but as Scout's father attending normal family events. His first return had been for Scout's Residence Hall's family dinner, where he had been treated with warmth and respect, but not the kind of starstruck attention that might have made Scout uncomfortable. During that dinner, Bruce had the opportunity to meet many of the students who had been present during the parking lot incident. He was struck by how articulate and thoughtful they were about the changes they had experienced and implemented. These weren't just kids who had witnessed a dramatic moment. They were young leaders who had taken responsibility for creating the kind of community they wanted to live in. Cole had approached Bruce during that dinner with obvious nervousness but genuine determination. "Mr. Willis," he had said, "I wanted you to know that what happened that day changed my life. Not just because of who you are, but because of what you said about choices and character. I'm trying every day to be someone you and Scout can respect." Bruce had been moved by the young man's sincerity and growth. "Cole, the person you're becoming is someone I already respect. Keep making those choices, keep growing, and keep helping others do the same. That's what real leadership looks like." The conversation had taken place in front of other students and parents, many of whom had been witnesses to Cole's previous behavior. Seeing his transformation validated by Bruce Willis carried special significance, but more importantly, it demonstrated that people could change when they were given support, accountability, and genuine opportunities for growth. Scout's academic performance had flourished in the supportive environment he had helped create. His professors noted not just his intellectual capabilities, but his emotional intelligence and leadership potential. He had declared a major in social work, inspired by witnessing firsthand how individual actions could create systemic change and how communities could heal from division and harm. The relationship between Scout and his father had deepened through their shared experience. Their weekly phone calls often included discussions about the ongoing changes at Westfield and how the lessons learned there might apply to broader social issues. Bruce found himself learning from his son's insights about generational differences in approaching social justice and community building. During his second campus visit for Scout's end-of-semester presentation about community organizing, Bruce had been invited to speak to a communications class about leadership and influence. Rather than focusing on his Hollywood career, he had talked about the parking lot incident and what it had taught him about the difference between authority and authentic leadership. Real influence, he had told the students, doesn't come from your position or your fame or your family's money. It comes from your willingness to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Every person in that parking lot that day had the opportunity to influence what happened next. Some chose silence, some chose cruelty, and some chose courage. The ones who chose courage, they're the ones who changed everything. The students had listened with rapt attention, not because they were starstruck, but because they recognized the truth in his words from their own lived experience. They had seen how individual choices could compound into community transformation, and they understood their own power to create positive change. Amy Guerra, who had transferred to Westfield the semester after the incident, often heard stories about the parking lot revolution from other students. As someone who had experienced severe bullying at her previous school, she was amazed by the culture of respect and inclusion she found at Westfield. The changes that had emerged from that single confrontation had created an environment where she felt safe to be herself and pursue her academic goals without fear. The ripple effects extended beyond the campus boundaries as well. Other universities had reached out to Westfield administrators asking about their anti-bullying initiatives and community building programs. High schools in the area had invited Westfield students to speak about creating inclusive cultures and the importance of bystander intervention. Cole's transformation had been particularly powerful in these speaking engagements. His willingness to admit his mistakes and share his growth process resonated with young people who were struggling with their own choices about how to treat others. He never minimized the harm he had caused, but he demonstrated that accountability and genuine change were possible. The scholarship fund that had been established in Scout's honor, despite his protests about not wanting his name attached, provided financial support for students from low-income families who might otherwise struggle to afford university expenses. Bruce had quietly made the initial donation, but it had been supplemented by contributions from other families and community members who wanted to support the values the fund represented. Dennis Porter had been one of the scholarship recipients, and his academic success had become a point of pride for the entire Westfield community. His confidence had returned stronger than ever, and he was now serving as a peer tutor for other students who struggled with social anxiety and imposter syndrome. As Scout's freshman year drew to a close, he reflected on how dramatically different his college experience had been from his initial fears. The anonymity he had craved had evolved into authentic recognition based on his character and contributions rather than his family connections. He had found his voice as a leader and advocate, skills that would serve him well in his chosen field of social work. The final community discussion of the academic year had focused on sustaining the cultural changes that had been implemented and ensuring that incoming students would be welcomed into an environment of respect and inclusion. The conversation had been facilitated by students rather than administrators, demonstrating how fully they had taken ownership of their community's values. Bruce attended that final discussion as a proud parent watching his son help lead a conversation about topics that mattered deeply to both of them. When Scout stood up to address the group, his voice carried the confidence of someone who had found his place in the world and his purpose in helping others find theirs. A year ago, I was terrified that people would judge me based on who my father is rather than who I am, Scout told the gathering. What I learned is that character reveals itself regardless of circumstances. The people in this room have shown me what real community looks like. Not perfect people who never make mistakes, but people who are committed to growing, learning, and supporting each other through that process. The applause that followed was warm and sustained, coming from students who had witnessed Scout's own growth and leadership throughout the year. Many of them had their own stories of transformation, their own moments of choosing courage over comfort, their own experiences of finding belonging in a community committed to mutual respect. As the evening concluded and families began to say their goodbyes, Bruce found himself surrounded by students who wanted to share their gratitude for the role he had played in creating positive change on their campus. But he consistently redirected that gratitude toward the young people themselves, emphasizing that lasting change came from their own choices and commitment rather than any external intervention. Cole approached Bruce one final time before the summer break, his graduation cap and gown marking the end of his undergraduate career. Mr. Willis, I wanted to thank you again for giving me the chance to become someone better. I start graduate school in social psychology next fall, and I want to study how communities can prevent bullying and create inclusive cultures. What happened? It changed the direction of my entire life. Bruce smiled and shook Cole's hand with genuine warmth. Cole, you changed the direction of your own life by choosing to grow and learn from your mistakes. That takes real courage, and I'm proud of the man you've become. Go make a difference in other communities the way you've helped make a difference here. As Bruce and Scout drove away from campus that day, both father and son reflected on the unexpected journey that had begun with a moment of cruelty and evolved into a story of transformation, healing, and hope. The lessons learned in that parking lot had rippled outward in ways they never could have imagined, touching hundreds of lives and creating lasting change in a community. Dad, Scout said as they left the university behind, thank you for knowing exactly what to say that day. But more than that, thank you for raising me to believe that everyone deserves respect and dignity, regardless of their background or circumstances. Bruce glanced at his son with pride and satisfaction. Scout, you proved that day and every day since that character isn't inherited, it's chosen. You chose to respond to cruelty with grace, to bullying with courage, and to conflict with community building. That's who you are, and that's who you've always been. The story of that morning in the parking lot would be told and retold at Westfield University for years to come, but its real legacy wasn't in the dramatic confrontation between a movie star and a campus bully. Its legacy was in the hundreds of small daily choices that students continued to make. Choices to include rather than exclude, to lift up rather than tear down, to stand up for what's right, even when it would be easier to look away. And somewhere in Hollywood, a proud father continued to receive updates from his son about the positive changes happening at a university where one moment of courage had transformed an entire community's understanding of what it meant to treat each other with dignity and respect. The real blockbuster wasn't the celebrity intervention. It was the ongoing story of young people choosing to be better, to do better, and to create the kind of world they wanted to live in. Remember, respect isn't about status, wealth, or family connections. It's about recognizing the fundamental worth and dignity of every person you meet. Has anyone ever underestimated you or judged you based on appearances? Share your story in the comments below, and let's continue this conversation about building Communities where everyone feels valued and included. Hit that like button if this story inspired you, and subscribe for more content about standing up for what's right and creating positive change in your own community.